We are accustomed to looking at this place from above. For centuries, Stonehenge has been described through what rises into view: massive sarsen stones, carefully balanced lintels, a circular order that appears both deliberate and restrained. It stands alone on the Salisbury Plain, isolated yet familiar, framed as a monument to ritual, astronomy, and collective effort. Archaeology presents it as a ceremonial site, constructed, modified, and reused over generations, its meaning inferred from alignments, burials, and landscape context. This explanation is stable. It is taught, repeated, and rarely questioned. What receives less attention is what lies beneath that order. Early excavation notes from the 20th century include a brief, almost parenthetical observation. Areas of unusually compacted soil beneath and around the central stones, denser than expected for natural chalk or routine foot traffic. The remark appears once attached to a trench report without interpretation. No diagram follows, no hypothesis is proposed. The excavation moves on. In later summaries, the reference fades. Published overviews describe post holes, pits, and ditches, features that fit within accepted models of prehistoric construction. The earlier note is not challenged, it is simply not expanded. There is no indication it was wrong. There is also no sign it was considered important enough to pursue. This absence is quiet but specific. Archaeology depends on patterns, and this observation never became one. It did not alter timelines or interpretations. It did not prompt a separate study. In subsequent publications, the compacted layers are folded into general descriptions of disturbed ground, their distinctiveness softened by broader language. Stonehenge remains officially a site understood through what is visible: stones, sightlines, an open sky. Subsurface detail is treated as secondary, supporting, not defining. And yet the question lingers, precisely because it was never addressed directly. If the monument tells its story through what stands above the ground, why were its earliest investigators already noting that something below it did not behave as expected? The shift did not begin with a question about meaning, but with a technical adjustment. In the early 21st century, researchers returned to the plain with instruments rather than shovels. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, electrical resistance, standard tools applied methodically, almost routinely. The goal was modest: refine maps, confirm known features, fill in gaps between past excavations. No one announced a search for hidden structures. The scans were meant to tidy the record. What emerged refused to stay tidy. Beneath the grass and chalk, the data traced shapes that did not behave like pits or post holes. Broad linear zones appeared where the soil had been repeatedly compressed, not dug. In several areas, these zones formed arcs that echoed the stone circle above, but at a larger scale and deeper level. Their depth was inconsistent with surface activity alone, and their edges were sharply defined, as if shaped intentionally rather than worn down by centuries of movement. This was not extraordinary on its own. Landscapes accumulate layers, but certain measurements began to resist easy placement. Some subsurface features extended farther than the visible monument, beyond areas traditionally associated with construction or ritual use. Others aligned precisely with known stones, yet sat too deep to be explained by their placement alone. Then came the coincidences. The scale of several underground forms exceeded what would be required for drainage or foundation support. The orientation of at least one linear feature followed a solstitial axis, but did not correspond to any stone or ditch currently visible. Preliminary dating of disturbed layers suggested activity periods that did not match the accepted construction phases as neatly as expected. None of this contradicted established interpretations outright. Each anomaly could be explained in isolation. Taken together, they formed an uneven picture, one that required careful language. Reports began to soften their conclusions. Phrases appeared and reappeared. Requires further verification. Interpretation remains open, not yet fully understood. Some datasets were released without detailed commentary. Others were summarized, their raw complexity flattened into general statements about complex subsurface activity. The impression that followed was subtle but persistent. The more precise the instruments became, the less decisive the narrative sounded. The surface story of the monument remained intact, elegant in its restraint. Beneath it, the data suggested a record that was harder to simplify, one that did not resolve cleanly into known categories of use, and that imbalance raised a quiet concern. If the simplest explanation were sufficient, why did the most detailed measurements produce the least certainty? After the initial surveys, the language changed, not abruptly, not publicly, but noticeably. Papers became shorter, presentations leaned on caution, questions that had been raised in technical sessions stopped appearing in abstracts. The data was still there, but the appetite to press it forward seemed to cool. What had begun as routine clarification drifted into careful silence. Several researchers later acknowledged this shift indirectly. In interviews given years apart, they described moments when follow-up work was delayed, or when specific subsurface zones were labelled low priority without clear methodological reasons. No one spoke of prohibition. The word used more often was sensitivity. Certain areas, they said, required restraint. Alongside this restraint came unofficial remarks, never part of published conclusions. A geophysicist mentioned being advised not to refine scans beneath a particular arc because it would complicate interpretation. An archaeologist recalled that access permissions were adjusted mid-season, narrowing where deeper analysis could occur. The findings already gathered were not disputed, they were simply not expanded. Some materials never fully surfaced. Interim reports referenced appendices that remain unavailable. High-resolution subsurface maps were summarized but not released in detail. One project proposal outlines a second-phase investigation, then ends without explanation. The work was paused. The reasons were not recorded. From these gaps, a small set of restrained theories emerged, not in headlines but in closed discussions. One suggests that the underground features represent an earlier, large-scale ground-shaping effort, platforms or compressed foundations, predating the stones themselves, implying that Stonehenge was built atop an already significant structure. Another proposes a concealed boundary system, subsurface divisions, guiding movement, access, or procession, deliberately hidden from surface view but integral to how the site functioned. A third considers that some features served a purpose that archaeology struggles to categorize, neither purely structural nor symbolic, making them difficult to place within established frameworks. None of these ideas violate known prehistoric capabilities. None demand lost technologies or outside influence. Their problem is simpler. They complicate a narrative long valued for its clarity. Below the grass, some zones remain unexcavated by design. Temporary fencing appears, then stays. Work continues nearby, visible and documented, while other patches are left undisturbed, described only in technical language that avoids specificity. If these unanswered details were insignificant, they would likely have been resolved by now. Their persistence suggests something else, that the story beneath the stones introduces questions the field is not yet prepared to settle. And when questions linger this long, it is rarely because there are no answers, but because the answers lead further than expected. What followed was not an end, but a narrowing. Research at the site continued, officially uninterrupted. Funding shifted toward conservation, visitor management, landscape preservation. Methodologies were refined, language grew more precise and more restrained. Access protocols tightened around certain zones, justified as protection rather than inquiry. The work did not stop, it changed direction. In final reports, the emphasis returned to what could be stated cleanly: phases of construction, stone sources, alignments already familiar. Subsurface data was acknowledged, then set aside with careful phrasing. No single explanation was offered for the deeper anomalies. Instead, they were grouped under neutral headings: complex ground modification, multi-period disturbance, terms that describe presence without defining purpose. Several elements remained unresolved: compressed layers that do not align with known building phases, subsurface arcs that mirror the monument's geometry but exceed its visible scale, zones mapped in early surveys that were never revisited in later campaigns. Each is documented, none is fully explained. Collectively, they are treated as background complexity rather than central evidence. Years later, a small addition surfaced in a technical workshop summary, barely noted outside specialist circles. A refined soil analysis from a peripheral scan indicated repeated controlled pressure at depth, inconsistent with natural settling. The finding did not alter published conclusions. It was marked for future consideration and left there. Today, the site is described with confidence: a prehistoric monument, a ceremonial landscape, a place shaped by human intention and astronomical awareness. These statements are accurate as far as they go. What they do not address is why the ground beneath required such extensive preparation, or why its internal structure mirrors order rather than accident. They do not explain why some data streams grew quieter as instruments grew sharper. No authority claims concealment. No document admits uncertainty beyond standard margins. The official story remains intact, measured, coherent, complete enough. And yet something essential feels unresolved. Perhaps the difficulty is not that something extraordinary was found underground. Perhaps it is that what was found does not fit neatly into the story we are comfortable telling, and so remains discussed in fragments, deferred to later work, quietly set aside. The stones still stand in open view. The ground beneath them keeps its distance. And between the two lies a history that may be less finished than it appears.